I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long. Oh, give me little time to pray. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long. Oh, give me little time to pray. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long. Oh, give me little time to pray. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long, children. I've been in the storm so long. Oh, give me little time to pray. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long, children. I've been in the storm so long. Oh, give me little time to pray. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long. Oh, give me little time to pray. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long. I've been in the storm so long. Oh, give me little time to pray.
Good morning, and welcome to the virtual sanctuary space of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Charleston, West Virginia. Welcome on the Sunday when we remember the legacy of the Civil Rights Movement, the legacy of those who did the incredibly unpopular work of taking on the racist structure of Jim Crow. On this Sunday, each year, we look back to the mid-20th century for reminders of what it takes and how we are inspired to do the work of anti-racism as we as a congregation and as individuals continue our 21st century commitment to the Black Lives Matter movement. We are so glad that you are with us today. I am the Reverend Caitlin Cotter Coilberg, minister of this congregation of compassionate, creative justice seekers. And I am joined for this service today by lay leader Elliot Hicks, who will be acting as today's worship associate and offering us a reflection, by our virtual usher, Matt Connolly, and our tech volunteer, Neil Chakrabarty. Many of the people of our community found a spiritual home here after searching for a place that's caring and welcoming of our individual gifts. What we share here is not an unchanging dogma, but an affirmation that we are called to be agents of love and justice, and to build a world where everyone is cherished for who they are. Doing that requires us who have privilege, to use our voices, our courage, and our resources to dismantle oppression in all its forms. This work requires our gifts of time, talent, and treasure. And so as we begin as we do each week now with an invitation to generosity. Neil, can you put up that first slide, please? So this is the moment in the service when I invite you to go grab a candle for our chalice lighting moment, and to pull up your PayPal app or find your checkbook and an envelope and stamp, or queue up the donation page on our congregation's web page, which is uucharleston.org. UU Charleston, West Virginia. Anyway, and it's right there. In the words of Elena Westbrook, far too often we are forced to confront the terrible things that people can do to each other. When these things happen, all we can do is come together and remind ourselves that there is still hope, there is still love, there are still good-hearted people who can look unblinking into the storm and continue to believe a calm, bright morning will come. This community is a refuge where we can keep the ember of hope alive when all the world seems intent on dousing it, and when we use our little ember to light a beacon for the rest of the world. Our offerings each week sustain this community so we can share our small embers to light a scary world. Please give generously so that we can all together help spread the light. Sorry, I'm having just a technical difficulty from it. There we go. Okay. All right, so some reminders. First, remember that we're doing a new program, a Share the Plate program, and we are giving 25% of each week's offerings to a partner organization. And this month we are supporting Mountaineer Food Bank, which of course is a crucial organization to be supporting in this time when so many are going hungry, facing unemployment, losing housing, needing to make sure their kids, all of their families are fed. A couple other reminders: I will be on study leave for most of the coming week, so please reach out to lay leaders like our congregation's president, Angela Cavender, if you have questions or concerns this week. Next Sunday, we will be doing Sunday service. And so the big next week, Sunday service is at 10 a.m. instead of 11, because our congregation is joining with a congregation up in New England led by our own Reverend David Miller Clomayer, who this congregation ordained into ministry in 2017. Reverend David grew into Unitarian Universalist minister in our congregation, was ordained by us, and we're joining him for service next week. Our own Penny Golden will be worship associate for that service, and I know it's going to be great. Also, today marks the start of 30 Days of Love. 30 Days of Love is a program of our Unitarian Universalist Association and our Side with Love campaign, and you can find more information about that at sidewithlove.org, and all are invited to participate. So now, before we swing further into our service, I invite you, if you are on Zoom, to move into gallery view, if you would, if you're comfortable having your camera on so we can wave hello to each other. And I invite you on Zoom or on Facebook to type in the chat box your hellos and your answer to the question, what are you dreaming of today? So I invite you to type into the chat or into the comment section on Facebook, what are you dreaming of today? And you can keep thinking about that if you would. But hello, good morning. It's so good to see some of your faces. I'm so glad to be in this space with you today. And I invite you now to join me in, let's see. Woo, I'm just having some technical problems here this morning. There we go. Peace for all. Right? And a peace that's not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice is definitely an end to the pandemic. I know we're all that freedom and justice for more. Yes. Yes. Right. This is what we're fighting for. Beautiful. So I invite you to join me in singing along to our first piece of music. First piece of music.
Morally, I was led to nonviolence because I felt that it was the best moral way to deal with the problem. We were seeking to establish a just society. And it was my feeling then, and it is my feeling now, that violence is certainly much more socially destructive, and it creates many more social problems than it solves. So I was led to nonviolence for deep moral reasons. And I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
There is no freedom, the wise man said, let justice roll down when the poor cry out for shelter and bread. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Hatred will never drive out hate. Let love roll down, roll down. Remember, our hearts can make us great. Let love roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. And let your love roll down like a mighty stream. When brutality threatens our daughters and sons, let peace roll down, roll down. May our voices rise up louder than the guns. Let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. Let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Step by step, one by one, let justice roll down, roll down. They can kill the prophet, but the dream lives on. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. And let justice roll down like a mighty stream.
I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
And at this
Reading
time,
is excerpts from Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham Jail, written in April 1963 in response to a newspaper ad by white moderate clergy deploring King's demonstrations as untimely.
I must confess that over the last few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached a regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set a timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time and who constantly advised the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail to do this, they become dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I'd also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth of time. I received a letter this morning from a white brother in Texas, which said, all Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually. But it is possible that you're in too great of a religious hurry. It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has. The teachings of Christ take time to come here on earth. All that is said here grows out of a tragic misconception of time. It is the strangely irrational notion that there's something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. I'm coming to feel that the people of ill will have used their time much more effectively than the people of goodwill. We have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively and forever realize that the time is always right to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and to transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity.
Hey, Caitlin, you're muted.
I was just muted for all of that. I apologize. uh, our chalice lighting words were by Jamie A. Yandel. We light this flame to ignite the sacred power of justice. We light this flame so that it may be a beacon of hope in moments of uncertainty, fear, anxiety, and the unknown. We light this flame and are emboldened by its blaze, knowing our strength as a prophetic and powerful people is rooted in the diverse ways we answer the call of love. So our time for all ages that we're about to move into now is a piece of music written by Unitarian Universalist Alistair Mook, who has given UU congregations like ours permission to use this song in worship. Alistair Mook was nominated for a Grammy for his Be a Pain album, and along with two other nominees in the family music category, turned his nomination down after discovering all the other nominees were, like him, white, and most of them were male. Only one was a woman. So I like this story as an example of both using both one's privilege and power. He's been using the press coverage around turning down his Grammy nomination to lift up the work of Black family musicians like Be a Change by Sal Paul, DAD by Pierce Freeland, and Unhurried Journey by Elena Moon Park. He's also co-founder of Family Music Forward, a collective of independent artists striving for an equitable future in children's music. He is imagining a better way, and he's putting his actions where his words are, right? His money where his mouth is, turning down a Grammy nomination. So this is a powerful example of how to be truly anti-racist. Sometimes that means giving up privilege, right? So here's his music video for Be a Pain, a reminder that doing what is right and working for peace is not about being nice. It is about seeking justice and accountability. Be a Pain.
If you see something that's wrong, raise your hand and say that's wrong. Point it out and name that thing by its name. Don't stand by and stare. If it's wrong, it's your affair. Don't be quiet, make a riot. Be a pain. Be a pain, shout about it and complain. Ignore the crowd and go against the grain. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain. When Rosa Parks sat on that bus, she chose to make a fuss. She chose to break the rules and take the blame. Her choice to sit and fight helped to bring on civil rights, because one strong woman chose to be a pain. Be a pain, shout about it and complain. If they say you have to move, say I'll remain. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain. Harvey Milk, chose to run for the council board and won, even though folks said you can't because you're gay. One brave LGBTQ elected leader ran and knew you can change things if you choose to be a pain. Be a pain, shout about it and complain. Tell them I won't let you make me feel ashamed. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain. Tennis star named Billie Jean told the world she had a dream that men and women would be paid the same. She refused to hit that ball till there was equal pay for all. She was a king because she was a royal pain. Be a pain, shout about it and complain. If they refuse to pay, refuse to play the game. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain. kids from Parkland led the fight for something they all knew was right. They said it's time for us to finally make a change. If adults can't compromise, we must go march for our lives. They spoke out and led the charge. They all were pains. Be a pain, shout about it and complain. When you're faced with laws you know are just insane. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain. Oh, be a pain, shout about it and complain. Ignore the crowd and go against the grain. Don't be polite, raise your voice and do what's right. Be a pain, be a pain, be a pain.
I invite you to join me in speaking the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of our faith and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Now, Elliot Hicks has a reflection for us. Thank you so much for doing this service with me today, Elliot.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to, talk about this. I mean, I know that to some, sometimes it can feel cliche that you have a Black speaker on Martin Luther King Day, on or about Martin Luther King Day. The reason it's not, and I've always thought of an article that I wanted to write called "The Way We Talk Around Here," but the reason it's not is because first of all, I'm a part of you and you are a part of me. What this congregation has given in helping to raise to raise my daughters and to help them understand their spiritual moorings better than they otherwise would has been very, very important, and that's not lost. While it can get easy to sit around and have a different routine on Sunday, it is awfully important to unite with those of goodwill, as we find in this congregation. And I've always been grateful for what we've been able to bring. I've said too that I find that my kids have found that they understand some other people's religions better than they understand their religions because of the things that we were able to talk about there at UUC. So, it's with that I've come to you with a few words. And, when I first conceived this, I thought that I would talk so much more about reflections that I have on how the letter from the Birmingham Jail, I thought I'd talk more about how the letter from the Birmingham Jail, what it meant to that time and how it relates to now. But as I read it again and again and again in preparation for this, what I find is that the letter generally stands on its own as a relevant and timeless piece of writing with a number of brilliant things. If you have the chance to go back and look at it yourself, you should, because in the letter from the Birmingham Jail, you have a number of the quotes that we take when we talk about Martin Luther King, even today. So so what I'm going to do, this may be a lot more of a reading and an amplification of what's already there than an analysis from somebody who, for some reason knows better. I don't know better. All I can do is live the same life you all are living and understand that this is the essence of relevance for right now and for what we face even today. So with that, let me begin to talk about this. So, A Call for Unity was a letter that was written by 8 white clergymen in Birmingham, Alabama, on April 12th of 1963. And it was written because because they were a little nervous. As a matter of fact, they were a little upset about Martin Luther King coming down to Birmingham and stirring up things that that they thought were under control and moving at what they thought was an acceptable pace. Well, in the letter, they took issue with the events that were directed and led in part by outsiders, which is what not only what the law enforcement officers called some of those with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference who came to mobilize there, but particularly what they called Martin Luther King. Both those people who were disparaging the marching and those who, or the demonstrations, and those who thought that they were in spirit with the people who were protesting, called Martin Luther King, were calling Martin Luther King an outsider. So, and what they did was they urged activists to engage in local negotiations and to use the courts if they were, if their rights were being denied, instead of demonstrating. Now, I think when we look back on the South at that time, we see the dark comedy of that kind of admonition to use the courts in the South to vindicate their rights. Certainly, the courts were very, very important in vindicating rights, and that's the reason I wanted to become a lawyer. I decided to become a lawyer when I was in the 9th grade, simply because of so many of those things that were going on in the civil rights movement, and I saw the law as a way to do something positive and to do something that helped civil rights. So, you know, what these 8 clergymen said was that honest convictions in racial matters could properly be pursued in courts, but they urged the decisions of those courts in the meantime should be peacefully obeyed. Hatred and violence, they say, have no sanction in religious and political tradition. The actions that incite to hatred and violence, however technically peaceful those actions may be, have not contributed to the resolution of our local problems. In other words, the stirring up of emotion, they were saying, had not really contributed to anything being better. King, as he said in the letter, had a lot of time to think while he was in the jail, as people do. And he penned a long letter that answered all of those criticisms. The first thing he said was that I can't sit idly by in Atlanta while the events in Birmingham take place. And he said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That's where that comes from. That's where that, when we often quote King as saying that, that's where that comes from. He said, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. That was his justification for being there. And what he said too was, I'm sure that that each of you would want to go beyond the superficial social analyst who looks merely at the effects and doesn't grapple with the underlying causes. You know, that's awfully important to say, because this is what we hear now, and this is what has caused me to try to tie these things together. We have people who talk more about the fringe, the people on the outside, and often people who were not involved in the peaceful protests themselves, doing things that, and they focus on what broke, on what things happened at that moment in the protest, instead of focusing on the underlying causes of the protest. And that's the reason it's so frustrating to listen to some of the people that we hear on some news channels, some analysts, some pundits that we hear, who immediately begin talking about the window that got broken or the fire that was set, instead of talking about what would bring these thousands of people out to protest. What would bring them? No, people haven't thought about that enough but instead they focus on the negative of the protest and how uncomfortable they are with protest. All of you know, many of you know, I wrote an article a few months ago about, protest isn't there to make you comfortable. Protest isn't there to make you happy. Protest is there to shake things up so that you can do something, so that people will do something different. You don't want to go back to the same things you did before after protest, or the protest didn't mean anything. And Dr. King says, I guess it's easy for those who've never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. Certainly the same with police violence today. When you've seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your Black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue tied and your speech stammering as you try to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the public amusement park that's just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she's told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and seeing the depressing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness toward white people. Then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. That part is awfully interesting to me because it seems that my first 2 experiences with prejudice, with negative prejudice like that, happened around pools. The first time I heard anything that was racially negative was when I was at a day camp at Kanawha State Forest, and somebody said, we have to get out of the pool, it's polluted. And I'd had no idea what they were talking about, but they were talking about me. The other thing was that my very best friends in the neighborhood here on the west side, where I am, they frequently went to Rock Lake Pool. Those of you who've lived here are familiar with Rock Lake Pool. It was a quarry that had been carved out and became a huge pool with lots of slides and rope swings and all that sort of thing. And it was a very, very important part of the recreation of a lot of the kids who grew up here. The place is still there. There's some sort of a church or some kind of a religious institution that now owns it, but it was a flashpoint, a focal point here for the racial discussion. That is that they could go, I couldn't, and I didn't understand that. I didn't know what was happening there. I didn't know why that was true. But my mother and father had to explain to me why I couldn't go with my next door neighbor to swim, why I couldn't go with my best friend across the alley to swim. It's interesting that those are the focal points for something like that. The King says, I must make 2 confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. And this is what I read earlier. I don't want to go over it again particularly, but I do want to say that he said, I must confess that over the last few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. And this quote is one that has been that a number of people have lifted up, and I think it certainly deserves that. The shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than the absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is more bewildering than outright rejection. Back to my words, I frequently said that the one thing that's most difficult to endure as videotaped evidence makes the incidents of police violence undeniable is that people don't believe us. that to me has been the most frustrating thing, to think that people who grew up where I did, here in Charleston, don't believe it when we say that these things have happened. They don't believe it when we talk about prejudice. They don't believe it when we talk about the denials of the ordinary life pleasures that come from bigotry. They say, the people of goodwill say, well, I can't believe they do that anymore, because they haven't felt that. Others, and then the people with whom I don't even expect to agree, will work compulsively to find a reason for the police reaction, which they then inflate into the dominant role in the story. You see, when you're looking too hard to find why did the police beat this man up, or why did the police shoot this person, even when you see that he has been shot in the back, even when you see that this person was unarmed, when you work so hard to find, well, what did he say? What was it that made this happen? They can't believe that this kind of thing happens, but you've got to believe us. And it's only now that people now have the evidence to see this. But one thing I wrote in the most recent State Bar magazine for the West Virginia, it's called the West Virginia Lawyer, is that is the thing that's most difficult for us to deal with. But you look back 20 some years now, 25 years, to the Rodney King beating, and we look at George Floyd and we think that wow, that's really something. That changes my mind. That makes things really, really different. Now that I've seen this George Floyd tape, now I know that something's different. But I urge you to go back and take a look at the Rodney King beating. Those were several very, very uncomfortable minutes too. Most of us who've been trying to talk about police violence and police over-policing, police overaction to Black people, when we looked at that, we thought, now we have it. Now we have the videotape proof that shows what happens here. But that proof was not enough. You recall that the officers in that beating, involved in that beating, were not disciplined, and there was almost no there were almost no criminal consequences for it. These people simply lined up and took sticks and beat this man while he was lying on the ground. And then they testified in court that he was the one who was in control of the whole situation. They beat him on his legs even while he was laying on the ground. And then when they kept beating him while he was laying on the ground, he tried to get up. And then they beat him for trying to get up. And so King says, in your statement, you asserted that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. But can this assertion be logically made? Isn't this like condemning the robbed man because his possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Here we come to see, as our federal courts have consistently affirmed, he says, that it is immoral to urge an individual to withdraw his efforts to gain basic constitutional rights because the quest of his rights precipitates violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. And then he says, I had hoped that the white moderate would see this. Maybe I was too optimistic. Maybe I expected too much. I guess I should have realized that few members of a race that has oppressed another race can understand or appreciate the deep groans and the passionate yearnings of those that have been oppressed, and still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, determined action. Since 2016, there was a revelation in 2016, since 2016's election, there was a revelation of a stream of thought that I had believed was effectively suppressed. I have struggled to answer my question: why would West Virginians, who have been good and welcoming people, turn in a political direction that welcomes braggadocio over humility, humility that's famous here, coarseness over kindness? Why would they do that? Well, King talked about his disappointment in white churches, and he expounded on how he believed that the predominant churches became tools of the establishment rather than institutes for positive change and inclusiveness. He said, let me rush to mention my other disappointment. I've been disappointed with the white church and its leadership. Of course, there are some notable exceptions, and he talked about some of those people who marched with him in the various protests. But he says, I had the strange feeling when I was suddenly catapulted to the leadership of the bus protest in Montgomery several years ago that we would have the support of the white church. I felt that white ministers, priests, and rabbis of the South would be some of our strongest allies. Instead, some few have been outright opponents, refusing to understand the freedom of movement and misrepresenting its leaders. The freedom movement and misrepresenting its leaders, I'm sorry. All too many others have been more cautious than courageous and have remained silent behind the anesthetizing security of stained glass windows. It says a lot about the church, and it says a lot about why many of us have found refuge in a place that is geared toward action over injustice instead of simply praying over it. He says the contemporary church is so often a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. It is so often the arch supporter of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's often vocal sanction of things as they are. And that's what we see when we see that so many of the evangelicals, people who consider themselves who worship themselves essentially as guardians of America's morals, have stood silent while from the top of our government, we demonstrate immorality, gross immorality, and constant immorality. If the church does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authentic ring, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. He says, I met young people every day whose disappointment with the church has risen to outright disgust. And that's what we have to watch for. We can't be silent. Again, we're preaching to the converted here, but the activism of our church is what we have to appreciate. How did the evangelical churches become as toothless as they are? Or maybe not toothless. Maybe you would say, how did they become the facilitator of a vulgar, self-absorbed Republican candidate in 2016? And then a president who's left our international reputation in ruins and left every department of government weaker than he found it. And he's found a warm welcome in our evangelical communities. How does that happen? That call for the church to stand up and be what it should be is a very, very important and impressive call, particularly coming from a man whose entire being is steeped in the church, the son of a minister, named after a minister. How does that happen? How did our churches fall into that trap? But what we need to do now is to try to figure out how we have a unifying conversation. We're trying to change the hot rhetoric that we have, and we're trying to change that into rhetoric that promotes unity, promotes a reunification, if there was ever a unification, of our interests with with those of the people we saw last week in Washington? How do we put that together? It's difficult to have a unifying conversation with a person who tolerates, much less believes, lies from the president about everything from the trivial to the critical. Some say he's not serious or he just wants to shake things up, and they dismiss it with that. The sins of this outgoing administration are really too frequent and too numerous to talk about during this talk. But anybody who excuses dishonesty, self-dealing, and criminality that have been endemic in this administration is exactly the kind of person who otherwise is good. Otherwise, we have a drink with them. Otherwise, we have a coffee with them. Otherwise, we have a sandwich with them. Otherwise, we see these people from day to day at work and might even call them our work friends. But those are exactly the people that Dr. King was speaking of. I'm not disappointed or angry with those people who do not have, who are not part of the power structure, who are not part of the the elite, so to speak. Those who don't know can be forgiven for lurching around as if they're in the dark. But the ones who are beginning to make me angry are the people who should know better. The people I see at social gatherings and restaurants and civic events. Some of them accommodate and tolerate government actions they know are wrong without a sound of protest. Perhaps they can't put themselves in the place of people who remain outside of the grasp of the full rights of American citizens should expect. Thomas Jefferson said, and I just heard this morning and I thought it was awfully good to include. Thomas Jefferson said, every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. Unfortunately, though, a number of the things that the differences of opinion that we have are differences of principle. And our challenge as we move forward, as we commemorate Martin Luther King and the wonderful words with which he's inspired us, our challenge is to find a way to talk to these people who sit by quietly, these people who think that they're not part of the problem, and to the contrary, think that they are part of the solution because their heart is good. We need to get those people to stand up. One of the beautiful things that we saw this past summer was the multi-generational, multiracial, multi-ethnic marches in protest of the George Floyd killing and others. That gives us hope. That gives us hope that we're moving in a more positive direction with people who will stand up with us, who will face danger with us, and who will speak out when things are not right in their country. It's not America, love it or leave it. It's America, love it or fix it. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Elliot. It's always so good to hear what you have to say. I'm just so delighted to serve a congregation in which folks like you are long-term members, making a difference in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And I invite you all to join us in another piece of music. And our service is just going to go long today. And I invite those of you who are nervous about that to acknowledge that part of white supremacy is also this white culture of having really firm time limits. And sometimes we hold them. And today we're just going long because we wanted to hear what Elliot had to say. And I am so grateful. I'm so grateful for all of you for being with us. And Elliot, always just so grateful for you and Nancy and your kids.
He had a dream of a world free of hatred and anger. He had a dream of a love beyond race, creed, or color. He had a dream and he gave it to me. What will I do with it? Who will I be?
I've got to stand up, shout and be heard. I've got to let my heart guide my words.
I've got to steady my speed and say, what would it be like if you were king for a day?
He had a dream that all violence would one day be ended. He's free, all free. He had a dream that our world torn apart would be mended. He's free, all free. He had a dream for you and for me. What will we do with it? Who will we be? We got to stand up, shine and be heard. We got to live our right word. We got to stay our feet and say, what would it be like
If you were king for a day.
Would you feed those who hunger, refresh those who thirst? Would you welcome the stranger and comfort the sick? Would you clothe the naked and set captives free? Would you work for justice to bring about peace? Would you hope for the future, unsure what it brings? Would you have the courage to live your own
He had a dream that one day we'd be here singing together. He had a dream that we're making it happen together.
He had a dream for you and for me. What will we do with it? Who will we be? We're gonna stand up, shout and be heard. We're gonna get our words. We're gonna steady our feet and say, what would it be like
If you were king for a day.
What would the world be like if you were king for a day?
Each week, we light a second candle for those affected by COVID, which is all of us and some of us more than others. And we know, of course, that part of the ongoing genocide and eugenics in our country has been that communities of color have been far more affected by this virus than others. As I light this candle, I invite you to type in the chat box on Zoom or in the comments section on Facebook who or what is on your heart and what you want held in the hearts of this congregation. This week, I know I am holding in my heart all those grieving lives lost to the virus and all those managing the trauma and painful uncertainty of these times. I am holding all those ill with COVID and those who have loved ones ill with the virus, as I hold all those living with a very real fear of violence right now, not just the inherent violence of white supremacy and capitalism and oppression, but the very real threat of violence from hate groups and others seeking to undermine democracy this week. And I offer you this prayer for protection by my colleague, the Reverend Elizabeth Wynn. For Black, Indigenous, Muslim, Latina elected officials, for the residents of Washington, D.C., for each of us who has ever been handcuffed or tear gassed or afraid of police or white supremacists or our government, for each of us who is afraid every day for ourselves or our loved ones or our children or this country, may we be protected. May we be protected from generations of violence and hate, from pandemic and sickness and fear. May we be protected not just because we have earned it, but because of the generous grace of justice and spirit. And may those of us who can be protectors protect, be pourers of tea for ourselves and others, builders of power for love for ourselves and others, reminders to breathe and eat and fight and tend, to rest and risk, so we may all be protected. And in our doubt and stress, may we rest in the air and the earth and the sky that have seen governments come and go, despots and haters come and go, that hold our bones and our breath with sacredness and survival. Words from the Senator-elect Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock. Will we play political games while real people suffer? Or will we win righteous fights together shoulder to shoulder? Will we seek to destroy one another or heed the call toward the common good, building together what Dr. King called the beloved community? May it be survival and justice. May it be shoulder to shoulder. May it be beloved community. This is our prayer. I invite you to take a moment with me now, dear ones, to breathe into whatever you are feeling this week, whatever mix of worry and relief, joy and grief, sorrow and optimism is moving through you right now. Together we hold the grief of this time. Together we hold the practice of hope, of bending the long arc of the universe towards justice. Together we hold each other in love. So I invite you to breathe as deeply as you are able, all that you are feeling, to let yourself feel your feelings and your love, and to breathe out peace into the room where you sit. Together as we are apart, let us breathe in silence for a moment. Amen. And please join me in singing along to our meditative hymn, which is also a beautiful reminder that we have what we need to do what is right now.
Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In dark and rain, sorrow and pain, still you remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing. Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still you remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing.
So So there is a call going out in our nation this week for healing, a call to be nice, to not be a pain about what happened on January 6th and what may happen again this week, a call to let the injustices and violence and atrocities of the last 4 years slide. Healing, in this context, is the language of white supremacy, as author Crystal Marie Fleming pointed out on Twitter this week. The obsession with healing, she goes on to say, in our national discourse is entirely about protecting white comfort and capitalism. It's about maintaining some semblance of the status quo. Forget about healing. We need to change and grow and build something new. I so appreciate her words, and she has some brilliant books and published works out there, and some of them published by Unitarian Universalists. Yay! So we know that the work of liberation is not the work of being nice, that liberation for all is going to be not just hard work, but painful and difficult work, that it has been painful and difficult and dangerous, even deadly work for so many oppressed folk and their allies for so long, and especially and specifically for those who were enslaved and the descendants of those who had been enslaved. Those of us who are white need to grow into being more comfortable with justified Black rage while staying affronted and appalled by the violence of entitled white anger, like what we saw unleashed on the 6th and may see unleashed again this week. And again, like what we saw on the 6th was a direct reaction, right, to the work that we've been doing for the last many years to build a more just society, right? Like these racist, violent outlash of our overt white supremacists, who are, by the way, mostly rich people. Like most of the people who showed up at the Capitol building were like wealthy people, not like, right? That this is not about some oppressed people trying to stand up for right. What happened at the Capitol building was privileged, wealthy people who are upset that maybe other people will get some justice, right? So I loved, Elliot, what you said about what is the protest actually about? Like what happened at the Capitol building on January 6th wasn't a protest, it was an attempted coup, right? What protests are what happened over the summer, what has been happening for years and years and years, the long, hard work of justice, of the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the movements that it has built on. So we, and I'm speaking to all of us, and I'm especially speaking to those of you who, like me, are white, need to keep looking at ourselves and wondering when we are being part of the problem instead of the solution. When we are accepting these calls for white comfort and capitalism over justice and equity. We have to acknowledge too that we are going to make mistakes, right? That all of us are going to make mistakes if we are going to try to do the right thing and then the next right thing. We are not white supremacists, but white supremacy in its more complex and subtle forms is everywhere in our culture and society. It's in the fabric of what our nation, of how our nation was constructed. We are trying to build something new and something better. And in the meantime, we're dealing with structures that are inherently racist and with our own white supremacy that's built into how we treat each other, how we think about things, how we interact with each other, what we expect, right? 11 days ago, we saw an unprecedented and horrific attack on a symbol and center of our nation's democracy and our elected official. As I said, privileged white folk from all over, including from West Virginia, broke into the United States Capitol building with the intent to do harm. White supremacists stormed the Capitol, and our culture of white supremacy meant that cops helped people down the stairs, right? The selfies with the rioters, they engaged in hand-to-hand combat instead of using ranged weaponry. Hand-to-hand combat with armed rioters who were coming there to like execute our elected officials, to murder people, right? And just generally weren't prepared for the rioters, as if there couldn't possibly be any threat. We all know that people of color or anyone protesting racism or racist institutions approaching our nation's Capitol building would have been met very differently, right? After all, as Eli Mistel put it, there is no way to protest white supremacy in a way that will meet the approval of white supremacists. There is no way to protest institutional racism that will be accepted by racist institutions. White people have a lot of thoughts on the proper way for Black folks to die. Where they come up short is imagining a society that allows Black people to live in peace without harassment and brutality from the police or any other white guy with a gun. We need to imagine better. We need to listen to people of color and believe them. And we must continue to dismantle the culture of white supremacy. This is the work that I've been loving seeing in our Unitarian Universalist Association the last few years, is really working to look at how white supremacy is baked into our institutions of Unitarian Universalists. I'm really excited about the 30 Days of Love action I mentioned. You'll see emails from me about it. And there's a report built in there where people have really been looking at how are we complicit, right? And how can we be better? The work to dismantle white supremacy, to do anti-racism, is always going to be considered poorly timed or inconvenient or rude. To work for liberation, we must be a pain, must refuse to wait for a more convenient season, must refuse to let the violence done by white supremacists or the inherent violence of white supremacy culture slide. There can be no healing until liberation for all is achieved, until there is justice and equality for all, consequences and accountability for all. We have to unite together against racism. Until all of us are free, none of us are free. Free from poverty, free from violence, free from oppression. So in just a minute, I will invite you to join me in rising in body or spirit to listen to a beautiful rendition of Lift Every Voice. And we do have permission to use this recording. They ask us that we're going to make a donation to an organization working for Black liberation in exchange for using this song. So I invite you to listen to the words of the song as best you are able. And if you can't hear them all clearly, I invite you to look up the words and really sink into them. And I can put them into the chat box after the service is over. So as Reverend Aisha Ansano reminds us, this is a song that starkly names the horrors and violence of racism in this country, and it is a song that should make us uncomfortable. Uncomfortable with the history that it calls upon, uncomfortable with the fact that the struggle for racial justice continues and has not come quite so far as it should have by now. How can anyone sing, "We're here," the words treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered without a deep, deep discomfort? Discomfort with the pain and horror that these words refer to, and discomfort with the fact that these words not only refer to a distant history, but also to what is happening now. Will you commit to sitting with your own discomfort? And then will you tap into that discomfort and do something? Will you lift your voice and sing until earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty? Please join me rising in body or spirit to hear this song.
Civil rights activist James Weldon Johnson wrote Lift Their Voice and Sing as a poem, which was set to music by his brother John Roseman Johnson in 1899. The song is now known as the Black National Anthem in America. It is a protest, a hymn, and a prayer of profound significance for our people. We lift every voice and sing to express ourselves. We lift every voice to show that we have strength in numbers and we will not be silent. We lift every voice and sing to be lifted, liberated, and free.
Freedom, the power to determine action without restraint. Freedom, the absence of or release from ties, obligations, or restrictions. Freedom, the ease or facility of movement or action. Freedom, frankness or boldness in manner or speech. Freedom, a political right. Until we are all free, none of us is free. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven
Let it resound loud as the roaring sea. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound, let it resounding sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, built in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place, come to our Father's side. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our story stands.
God of our weary ears, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far along the way, thou who hast by thy might
Let us into the light. Keep us forever in the path we pray.
That was the Stanford Talisman Singers singing the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice. So this week, beloveds, I invite you to be courageous, and I invite you to be careful and caring. I invite you to think about ways to be a pain and also about your physical safety. It is always the right time to be courageous. It does not always mean it's a good time to confront hate directly. So I say this because we are getting warnings from our Unitarian Universalist Association and from the United Church of Christ about liberal and progressive religious institutions being targeted. And I know our mosques and synagogues are also under threat right now. It is always good to confront anti-Semitism. That doesn't always mean confronting anti-Semites. It is always good to do the work of anti-racism. It does not mean it is our job to be in the faces of the white supremacists. So please stay away from the state capitol complex this week, for example. Please be careful and caring. Keep wearing your masks and practicing social distancing. We are keeping each other safe by staying connected while staying apart. So I extinguish this candle and this chalice, but not the light, the warmth, the beacon of our community in the world and for each other, not the love that drives us to make this world a better place in all the different ways that we do that work. Remember, dear ones, you are enough just exactly as you are, and you are not alone. Keep doing the next right thing right now. So with that, I'm going to close off our Facebook feed. So I'm stopping the live stream there because we're going to move into our coffee hour time. And I invite those of you who are on Zoom to move to gallery view. So we're going to move into our coffee hour. So let's see. You can unmute now as you are willing and able. Hello. So I want to give us just a minute all together before we go into breakout rooms. Our breakout room question is, how are you going to be a pain in the next few weeks? How are you